So I opened up the chat so I can see it. So if you guys have any questions or thoughts, feel free to, verbally jump in at any time, but also you can use the chat if you want to send me a message. Otherwise, what I'll do is kind of open it up to you, and then I'll try to touch on the report guidelines a little bit, and then touch on some of the key ideas from today's reading. So again, I don't want to go over a lecture again like I already have, but I'll highlight some few things and see if you guys have any questions. So can you hear me okay? Okay, I just got a message saying my internet connection is shaky, so just let me know if I'm breaking up or something. So yeah, I'll open up to you. Do you guys have any questions or thoughts so far about the class in general, about the book report assignment? No questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Could you do like a brief overview of the assignment? I'm just kind of like confused what's going on.
For the book report?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we'll start there, and then we can move in any direction that you want me to move. So starting at the top, can you see the report guidelines on your screen? Okay. So basically, it's due the 29th. So it seems like, a ways away, but it'll come sooner than we know. So, don't wait till the last minute. I always say it's important to kind of have this in mind when you're actually reading the book, when you're going through the lectures, and that'll help you kind of get started as you're working through the book rather than you get started only after you finish it. And one thing to keep in mind as well, I organize my lectures basically to parallel the book report guidelines. So rather than trying to provide a chapter by chapter summary, I organize these lectures for the book with reference to the questions. So follow along with the lectures and you'll see kind of what's going on in terms of the report guidelines too. So the first part I'll get into is citing the book. So anytime you are using direct quotations or if you're paraphrasing something, by paraphrasing, basically you're talking about an idea from the book, but it's not word for word. You need to cite where that information comes from. And you cite for two main reasons. You cite to avoid plagiarism, so you're not trying to take credit for these ideas that weren't your own. And also you cite to give the reader the information that they need to find that in the book. So if I'm reading your report and it's a very interesting quote or an interesting idea that I see, you kind of tell me where I could go back to the book and find more on that quote or find more about the idea that you're talking about in the paper. So here specifically, I show you how to do citation in the ASA format. It's the author's last name, the year of publication, so Leroux 2011, and then you have the page or page numbers where you can find that information. So basically, whenever you're kind of referring directly to the book, make sure you're citing where the information is coming from. So there should be more or less at least one citation per paragraph, often, more than one citation in a paragraph. If you use alternative styles, such as MLA or APA, that's fine as well. But, I just basically give you an example of how we do it with the ASA format. So the report should be at least 3 full pages, double spaced. And as long as you're doing what I'm asking you to do, you should have no trouble at all reaching the 3-page minimum. If you go over, like 4 or 5, 6 pages, that's fine. Most students will go over like 4, sometimes 5 pages with this specific report. So if you go over a certain amount of pages, don't worry about it. You only lose points when you don't meet the 3 full pages mark. So the first part here, so looking at 2, 3, and 4. Part 2 basically is asking you to get into the thesis and explain it. LaRoe went into the research with two main variables, trying to understand how race influences parenting styles and how social class influences parenting styles. So going into the research, she's examining how race shapes parenting and how class background shapes parenting. Throughout the research, and at the end, she says the two variables both matter, but one matters more. One has stronger influence compared to the other when it comes to shaping how a parent parents. And I'll let that cat out of the bag soon. But the first question basically asks you to identify of those two variables, which is more important when it comes to shaping parenting styles. Then I'm asking you to explain that response. So you're going to either pick race or class. Then you're going to explain, why that variable matters more when it comes to parenting than the other one. So any questions about part 2?
Yeah. So is it like her opinion or our opinions?
It's what she argues in the book. So basically her thesis, and we'll get into that later, says that this matters more than the other. And this variable shapes parenting, and then the parenting contributes to what we call class reproduction. And so number 3 asks you to look at the 3 main connections that she highlights between the class background of the family and the different parenting styles. And again, this is how I kind of organize our lectures for our Tuesday's class, our next Thursday, and the following Tuesday. I break up our lectures in reference to each of those 3 connections. And, I'm basically following how she organizes her book. So if you look at the table of contents, she says, part 2 of the book is daily life organization, part 3, language use, and part 4, families and institutions. Those are the 3 connections that I'm asking you to discuss in part 3 of the paper. So basically, you identify those 3 connections, you come up with examples to illustrate what's going on in terms of class shaping one parenting way or another. And then I ask you to explain why class is doing this. So the different parenting styles don't emerge out of thin air, or rather class is that driving variable that makes you parent in one way or makes you a parent in another way. So what is it about class that's shaping this? Is it money? Is it issues of time? Is it education? So we'll talk about different class-based resources that contribute to the parenting styles being one way or another. So anything about part 3 of the paper? So then the last part asks you to look at the variable of race when it comes to parenting. So basically, look at one connection between race and parenting. Give one example in the book of how race is influencing how a parent is parenting. So here's the example, kind of explain what's going on. So that's basically what I'm looking for in the paper. And, this kind of makes sure that you're hitting kind of all the points. Because each one has, multiple parts to it. So, for the second one, I'm asking you to pick, is it race or is it class? And then the second part of that would be explaining your choice. So, a good way to stay on top of everything and to hold yourself accountable is to make an outline. So basically, starts, with an outline and making sure that you're answering each part of the questions being put forth. And, when I was in, your shoes, I often had instructors tell me to make outlines, and I always said, yeah, no, I don't need an outline. And then finally in grad school, I started to make outlines, and it makes your job so much easier when you spend a good, 10, 15 minutes making a solid outline. So it kind of gives you an idea that this is what I need to do and this is how I'm going to do it. So hopefully somebody takes me up on that advice, but I probably wouldn't if I was in your shoe. So any other questions about the report guidelines?
How much of the book are we supposed to read?
Yeah, so if you follow your syllabus, you go to the course schedule and the syllabus, basically that tells you, what you should be doing for that class period. So it's the same thing as we've been doing up until this point. Every class I've assigned a different reading for the different dates, and I continue to do that with the book. So basically today the assigned chapters were 1 and 2, and then for Tuesday's class, you'll see chapters 3, 4, and 5, and then following class 6, 7, 8. So anyways, that's basically for you to keep up with, the book in a timely manner, but also you can follow along and kind of know what's going on in the lectures. So, on the one hand, if, you're reading the book and I'm not doing the lecture, then it's kind of half empty, half full. On the other hand, if I'm doing the lectures and you're not reading the book, it's the same situation, kind of half empty, half full. So you need to come to the lectures having read the material so you have an understanding of it already, and then I'll try to highlight some things on top of, what's going on. I'll try to, draw out key points. But that's why I think, you make sure you're keeping up with the assignments on your end, and I'll keep up on my end, and that's, where we kind of get the most out of it.
Okay, so like I see on the syllabus, it says like today it says social class / race, Annette Laurel, unequal childhood class and family, chapter 1 and 2. So we would be reading that today. And then like the 15th, we'd read 3, 4, and 5. And
Yeah.
like just kind of keep up with that then?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you can always feel free to read ahead, but, just be careful not falling behind. Just
Yeah.
because, this book, a lot of information is going on. And, I'm not giving you a summary chapter to chapter of my lectures. Rather, I organize the lectures in response to what's going on in the book report.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So let's, this is what I did with my earlier session, so I'll do it with you guys as well. I'll walk through some of today's lecture with you. So, it's, you have this recorded, whether it be the YouTube version or the Zoom version. But, I'll kind of highlight some important parts of the lecture for today. And again, just kind of let me know if you have any questions along the way. So just, quickly, in sociology, when we think of race and when we think of social class, we conceptualize race as a social category. It's a category in which we place people based upon biological traits. So here, just kind of keep in mind that although we think race is strictly biological, it's very social in nature. Yes, we use biological traits such as skin tone, hair type, facial features. We use those traits to put people in racial categories, but the categories themselves are very social. And this is captured in how they're fluid. The racial categories will change over time. So in the slide, I talk about in the United States, for a while, if you're Italian, if you're Irish, you're considered to be non-white. You're placed in the mixed category. But today, if you are Irish or Italian, you're in the Caucasian white category. So again, and it's nothing static, black and white. It's very kind of social in nature. And so is the creation of these categories. So over time, you're creating more and more racial categories. If you look at the census in 1850 compared to 1880, 3 categories versus 5. And we don't add 2 categories because we have new types of people. Rather, we just create them to put people in. The Indians, the Chinese were here in 1850, but we just didn't have a socially created category for them yet. We kind of just put them in the mixed categories. So today, we have over like 14 choices, but again, it's not because people from different backgrounds are mating and reproducing. It's simply because we are creating and recreating new racial categories. And so the categories not only change over time, but they change place to place. If you look at South Africa and look at Brazil, the racial categories are different. You have white as a common racial category, but you have brown, brunettes, mulatto, yellow in Brazil, and those categories aren't shared in South Africa. Nobody's right or wrong. It's just how they decided to socially create one category versus another. So when we talk about social class, we're looking at a category based upon one's income, basically the money you earn through wages or salary, and a person's assets. So when you combine assets and income, basically that's how you get one's class position if you're going to be in the upper, middle, working, or lower class. And assets basically are things people own. So assets always say are potential money. You own something and you could sell it to get money. So homes, cars, jewelry, artwork, again, basically anything you own can serve as an asset if you can exchange it for money, stocks, bonds. So yeah, that's what we're looking at in terms of class. And then let me just touch on, for our purposes today, class reproduction. So when we say class reproduction, we're saying that people are more likely than not to reproduce the class that they're born into. So if you're born into the working class, odds are, the numbers tell us that you're more likely than not to stay in that working class. And the same thing if you're born into the upper class. If you're born into upper class, you're more likely than not to stay within that upper class. So yes, you can recognize mobility is possible. And by mobility, you can move upward in class or you can move downward. But for the most part, 7.5 out of 10 people stay in their class position. If you're born into the middle class, you typically stay there. If you're born into the lower class, you typically stay there, so on and so on. So that's what we mean when we say class reproduction. And that's a big part of what LaRoe is getting at in her book. So any questions about race or class, just in terms of how we're discussing it? All right, well, getting into LaRoe, again, I don't want to kind of go everything word for word, but just kind of highlight some key aspects and relate them back to the report guidelines for you guys. So the focus of the book, like I mentioned, was I want to go and research all these families and specifically look at how the parent parents and how that has certain consequences for the kid based upon those parenting styles. And to look at parenting styles, I want to look at how social class and how race influence parenting. And as they go through it, they want to see how the parenting styles also reproduce social inequality. This meaning that if you're born into a class, you stay in that class reproduction, that also reproduces the inequality between people. So what's going on with the parenting, how that parenting is being shaped by class and race, and how the parenting contributes to the class reproduction. The working class kids staying in the working class, or the middle class kids staying in the middle class. So here's the, cat out of the bag moment, is to make things clear for us as we kind of move forward. LaRoe, throughout the research, starts to find at an early stage that class matters more than race. So that becomes the thesis. Class shapes parenting styles, which in turn contributes to class reproduction. Race does matter, and we'll see that in the book, and we'll talk about it as well. But class matters more than race. And you can see this when you start to look at the different chapters. So for example, I just did a lecture yesterday. I believe I uploaded, I uploaded a lecture yesterday on chapters 6 and 7. And those two chapters look at two different families. And one family is African American and from the middle/upper class. And the other family is African American from the working/lower classes. So if race mattered more than class, then the two African American families should be parenting more or less in the same way. But that's not what you find. You find that although race is similar, the parenting styles are different. And so it's the different class backgrounds that are shaping the different parenting styles. Likewise, when you look at an African American family and a white family from the same class background, no matter if it's upper class or working class, when they share the class background, even though the race is different, they tend to parent in the same ways. Likewise, when you look at two white families from different class backgrounds, they tend to parent differently, although they're both white. So that's kind of the thesis, the main argument that you'll be seeing from the get-go. So does that make sense? Okay. And so throughout the research, they do find that these two different styles of parenting emerged. So yes, there's going to be overlap between the two different styles, but there's also differences that do exist. And you kind of use those differences to conceptualize one way of parenting and another way. And so one parenting style is what they labeled concerted cultivation. And it's labeled as such because the parent or the parents are mindfully trying to cultivate certain skills in their kids from a very young age. They want their kids to have very good communication skills, very good thinking skills, very good organization skills. So they're trying to cultivate these skills in the kids at a very young age because they know these skills, being organized, being able to think critically, being able to communicate effectively, these skills pay off. They pay off when you go to school. They pay off when you're at work. The other parenting style they found, they labeled the accomplishment of natural growth. So sometimes I'll say CC when I talk about the concerted cultivation, or I say NG when I talk about the natural growth. And again, here the natural growth parenting styles label as such because it's more about kind of letting the kid grow up on their own. The parent obviously still parents, but it's kind of a mentality that I can't do it for you. You're going to have to learn it for yourself. And so the kid's kind of growing up more kind of a natural, organically getting through life compared to the CC parent approach where they're kind of trying to do everything at once for the kid. So those are the two kind of main parenting styles that we need to know from the beginning of the book, because that's what she uses to kind of take us throughout the rest of the chapters. So any questions about the two parenting styles? So, we'll come back to these characteristics, throughout the text. But, what I wanted to do for today's class is to give you an idea of the two parenting styles that we're going to be talking about and, some characteristics of each. So that's how we can separate one from another by saying that, this one has certain characteristics and the other one has other characteristics. So, one thing I'll say before I get into this is, every chapter primarily concentrates on one kid, one family. But that same chapter can be generalized, generalized to other kids in the same parenting style. So if you see it's a CC family chapter, then that can be generalized to other CC kids. If it's an NG parenting chapter, then that chapter can be generalized to other NG parents, other NG kids. So just going back to some of the characteristics, the middle class, upper class parenting style is connected to the concerted cultivation parenting. So when we think of concerted cultivation, we need to think of upper and middle class families. When we think of upper middle class families, we need to think of the concerted cultivation style. So when we think of the NG style, the natural growth, we need to think of the working class and lower class families. And then again, when we think of these lower class, working class families, what comes to mind should be that NG parenting style. So again, the rest of these characteristics we'll talk about, as we go through the book. But just for examples, free time for the children is a characteristic of the NG parenting style. The kids typically have a lot of free time on their hands, when they get out of school, compared to the CC kids that have very structured time, meaning that they are involved in a lot of formal activities. So they go to school, then they go to a practice, they go to a game. So they're juggling a lot of responsibilities throughout the week compared to the NG kid that maybe isn't involved in any activities or perhaps only one activity. So it's a more open schedule versus a structured full schedule in the CC kids. And then we can get into reasoning and kind of more black and white directions. What you see in the NG families, it's more black and white directions, meaning that parent kind of talks to the kid and there's a little back and forth. The parents, asking the kid, do you have your homework done? Did you brush your teeth? Are you ready for school tomorrow? How are you going to get home? So a lot of this is basically kind of a directive to the kid, basically a yes or no answer. In the CC families, you see more kind of reasoning going on, a lot more conversation flow, and the parent often is intentionally trying to get the kid to reason. So why are you picking, what you picked? Why are you saying what you say? So they're trying to get the kid to, develop reasoning skills. And again, they do this intentionally because they know these skills will pay off later in the kid's schooling, in the kid's work life. So when we talk about institutional distance or involvement, these are two characteristics that basically touch on how much involvement you see from a parent in their kids' school, in their kids' sports. And you see a lot of involvement kind of going above what's being asked of you in these CC parents. So not only you're doing kind of the minimum, but you're kind of heavily involved. You're doing more than what's being asked of you. What you see with the NG families is basically you're involved, but there's more of a distance. You're just kind of doing what's being asked of you. You're not going above and beyond the call. And so all these characteristics that we're kind of putting in one category or the other, they make the parenting styles different. But we have to keep in mind that they're all a consequence of the different class backgrounds. So in our next lecture, we'll talk about, why a class matters to have free time or to have a structured schedule. Because a lot of these activities cost money. So if you can't afford to enroll your kids in all these activities, then your kid's gonna have a more open schedule compared to if you have money, then you can afford to enroll your kid in these activities that have fees, that have costs that come with them, whether it be paying for musical equipment, paying for a fee to play in the league. If you have the money, those things are not an issue. But if you lack that money, maybe you say to your kid, you can be in the band if you want, you can play sport if you want, but we can't afford to do both. Thus, you're going to have more free time on your hand when you're not enrolling in a lot of these activities. Does that make sense, how a class can kind of be used to explain these things? And so finally, kind of getting at the spheres with adults, the CC kids tend to be around adults a lot. So we say they're in the same spheres, whether it be a coach, whether it be an instructor or a parent. Typically, the kid is always around an adult figure. And the NG kids, we're not trying to say that they're not around adults, but only in comparison to the CC kids, we can say that, yeah, it's not as much. Typically, they're with their peers more than with other adult figures. And overall, we'll kind of talk about this more near the end of the book. Leroux argues that the NG kids develop a sense of constraint, kind of going through their schools, going through their work. They kind of feel like the world is working against them. They feel constrained, and they just want to survive. They just want to get by. I just want to get through my classes. I just want to get the job done and kind of move through. The CC kids, on the other hand, have more of a sense of entitlement, that the world is not against me. The world is there to do whatever I want with. And they take a sense of entitlement into school, into work, where they don't want to simply survive and get by. They want to succeed and they want to thrive. And so, all those things are characteristics of the two different parenting styles, but our job is going to be kind of connecting the class-based resources such as time, money, a parent's education, to why we do see one parenting style or the other. And then also kind of recognizing why parenting like this has certain consequences for the kid, and why parenting like that have other consequences, and how those consequences contribute to the working class kids likely staying in the working class kids, or how they contribute to the upper and middle class kids likely staying in the upper and middle classes. So I know that's kind of a lot of information to throw at you at once. It's important to kind of have that in mind as you go through the rest of the book. So I'll stop there for now. Any questions or anything I could touch on further?
Should we write the paper as we're reading the book, or read the book and then write the paper?
For me, I think it's easier when you're writing and reading at the same time. You don't necessarily have to be doing it in kind of full sentences, full paragraphs, but kind of building a good outline. So, you're going to, pick your race or class, and then you'll kind of be reading the book, and here's a paragraph, or here's a sentence I can use to explain my choice. Here's a part in the book where Leroux says, class matters more than race. Or here's a section of the book where you're looking at two white families, but they parent in different ways because they come from different class backgrounds, thus proving that class weighs more than race. Because if race weighed more, they'd be parenting similarly, but because class matters more, although they share the same race, that doesn't matter. They're going to be parenting differently as they come from different class backgrounds. So again, I would just kind of start writing maybe more informally as you're reading it, and then you can really go back through it and finish it up after you completed the book.
Thank you.
Well, so any other thoughts? All right, so what I'll do is stop the recording now. Did you guys see the PowerPoint I was going through that?
No.
Oh, you couldn't?